Now, to continue with the subroutines. So, okay, what is subroutine? Just an overview. Rather than writing lines and lines of huge code in your Perl, you can group them as something called as subroutines. And whenever you want to call the set of lines, you just call the subroutine so that at that point of time, Perl will expand all the code for you so that you can reuse it, and also it gives more meaningful grouping for all the code. So in some cases, if you want to pass some parameters or arguments to the subroutine itself, then how is that you're going to do? Say for some example, you're writing a program and the same subroutine will be called more than once. But what will happen is you might have to pass some argument to the subroutine. Now, just like how you pass an argument to the script, you can pass some argument to the subroutine so that for different scenarios, the work will be different. So now, say if you want to work in that scenarios, how is that you want to pass the parameters? So now there is one special variable that we need to understand. Now, just like for the parameters, if you remember, argv is the array which stores all the arguments that is passed to the script when runtime, right? In the same way, if you are passing an argument to a subroutine or a function, then it will be stored in a special array called at the rate underscore. Okay, so remember, at the rate underscore is a special array which stores all the parameters that you're passing to a subroutine or a function.
Uh, Adam, I can't see your screen.
Can you see the screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, so now this is what I'm saying. Now, this is for the complete script, but if it is for a specific subroutine, then at the rate underscore is the default what array, a special array which stores all the argument, and this will be applicable only within any function that you're trying to use. Okay, say for example, you have a function like this. Okay, and now if you are trying to call this subroutine, okay, and now you are passing a value to this, say for example 10, 20, you're passing two values to it. Now this 10 and 20 has to be available within this. Then this at the rate underscore will be having this value within this subroutine. Now when you say the at the rate underscore is a special array which is going to store the value that you have passed to a subroutine, now how is that you will get individual value? Now once again going back to the standard, now if at the rate underscore is an array, then in order to get the individual values, we need to use the index of it. So if you use index, how do you get it? So since these are individual or scalar variables that you want to take, then we will simply say dollar and the name of the array, that is underscore, and then in the square brackets you will say the index, wherein now dollar underscore dollar zero, that is in the bracket index of 0 will represent 10. In the same way, if you say dollar underscore of 1, this represents 20. Getting it? This is the same way as how we used to get the values for argv, right? How we used to get it. So if you want to get a value from a specific array using an index, then you should always say dollar, then name of the array, and then in the square bracket, the index number, right? So in the same way, now underscore is the name of the array here, and at the rate underscore is the complete array name. So in order to get the index value or a specific value, we will simply say dollar, the name of the array, that is underscore, followed by the index number. Getting it? This too. All you need to know is @_ is the special array. Okay, so now when you use it, now remember this @_ will be visible only within any subroutine, not outside the subroutine. That means now if you come outside and here if you say $_of 0, it will give you an error because there is no subroutine here. In fact, if you see, this is a specific subroutine called test, and any special array, that is array_, is available only inside a subroutine, not outside a subroutine. Okay, so let us take an example and let's try to see how it's going to do. Now, an example is that, say I'm giving you a scenario where we have to take an average of some numbers. Okay, so how is that we're going to do it? Now, quickly, what I'm trying to do is I'm writing a script where if we pass 3 values or 4 values, whatever values, okay, it should try to find the average. Now, how do you do the average? How do you do the average?
Divided by 2.
Yeah, we need to first add all the values that you have, and then based on how many number of values you have, you will add it, right?
Oh,
Add
I'm
and then
sorry, I thought
divide.
it is just like average of two numbers.
No, see, whenever you're writing a script, it has to be generic, right? Now, if you pass 2 numbers, okay, tomorrow if you pass 3 numbers, it should still work. That is how you should always think, not specifically. It should be more generic. So, however, like I said, if you pass some values, you should first add all the values and then you should divide based on number of values that you have, right? Okay. So now, how is that you're going to do it? So let's, okay. Now, rather than writing everything, what I'll do is I will make that as a subroutine. Okay. So that if you pass any value to the subroutine, it will work based on that values. So I'll simply call the subroutine as average. Okay, the subroutine is not average, the name of the subroutine is average. So now here, what and all do I need? I need to pass some values and it should be able to work for me, right? So how am I going to call this? Literally, we will be calling it as average and some values within this. This is how it is going to work. Okay, so now whatever values that I pass here, it should be taking within it. So now, say for example, I'm passing it, so you can pass it by a comma separated, or even you can pass it by an array. That means I can create a value there and you can pass that also. So now here, what I'll do is like I can pass 2 values, it should still take it. Now, any number of values that you're going to pass, it should still work. So the very first requirement for me is I need to get all the values that you have within this array. Okay, so now we know that @_ is the array which is going to store all the values. Okay, now one thing what you can do is you can directly use this @_, or the other way of simple doing is you can create your own array. Say for example, I'll call it as A, and I'll say this way. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating an array called @A, and I'm storing all the values whatever you have on this at the rate underscore, because anything on the right hand side will be evaluated and the value would be stored on the left hand side. So now on the right hand side, if you say it is at the rate underscore, that means it is an array. And what does it value contain? It contains two values. So it is going to take both the values and put it into this. Now if I print at the rate a equal to at the rate a, okay, so you're getting this value. I'm just trying to replace it. It is because if I start using it, then I have to use this variable called dollar underscore. So it might be a little confusing for you. That's the reason, to make it simple, I'm just assigning all the value to this. So now I can use dollar $a as a usual array, so that if you want the value, you can get it from this. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is, the very first thing is I need to add the values that I have inside this, right? So now I don't know how many values that I have within this. So one thing what I can do is simply let me create a variable called total, and I'll make it as 0. Okay. Now what is that we need? I need to add all the numbers, but I don't know how many numbers that you have within it. So here I can use a loop. Okay, so in this loop I can simply say a. So what is this going to do? This is going to go through each element whatever is available in a. Suppose if you say two values, it is going through 2. If you have 3, then it is going to 3. So like that, it will go through how many ever values that you have given. Okay, so now here, what is that I want to do is add all the numbers, right? So now here I'll say dollar total equal to dollar total plus what? Dollar n. Now what is this going to do? Now it will try to go through the loop wherein for each element that you have in the array, that is you have passed, it will keep on adding it to the total. Okay, so that means now when you pass 10, 20, you have 10 and 20. So for the first value called 10, it will come here, total equal to total plus n. So what is total? For the first time it is 0. 0 plus the first value is 10. 0 plus 10 is 10. So total is 10. Then it will once again go with the second value. Now $n will be 20. So total equal to total plus n. What is total now? 10. 10 plus 20, that is 30. So total will be 30. In case if you have passed another value, then it will then add that also, so that you are iterating through all the values with the element regardless of how many values you have, and you will get the total value. Okay, so now we got the total value. The next thing to do is to take the average. Now how do you take the average? So to take the average, I need to know the number of elements, right? So to get the number of elements, I can create one more variable. Okay, I will say number equal to, so if I say dollar hash and the variable name, what will it do? It will try to give me the total number of elements in an array. Again, going back to the basics, but this will give me one value lesser than the total. So I can simply add 1. So now it will give me the total value. So now I have the total of addition of all the numbers, and I also have total number of elements that I have. Then simply the next thing to do is average, correct? So now if I say $avg, a new variable, equal to what? Dollar total divided by dollar $num. Okay, so here, done. And finally, you can say print average of what? I'll say at the rate A is $avg. Okay, getting it here? So let us try to run this. Okay, there's no syntax error. Okay, so you got it as 10, 20, 15. Now, since I've written it as an subroutine, we can call it as many times as we want. So for example, here, I can call whatever value that I can want, I can pass it. Okay, so I'm just passing another rough value. So here, so every time you call, the subroutine will be invoked and it will go through all the lines and then it will try to take the average of whatever value that you have given and it will be working on it. Okay, so this is one way where you can pass subroutine for every time you're invoking, so that now for each time you're invoking, at the rate underscore will have different values. That is, for the first time, at the rate underscore will have only this two values. The second time when you're invoking, at the rate underscore will have these values. Getting it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, same talking to the, talking about the same subroutine. There would be some times wherein you need to return some value from a subroutine, or to understand, by default, every time when you invoke a subroutine, it will be returning some value. So when I say returning, what it means is, so here, if you see, in this example, you are invoking subroutine, right? After completing the the subroutine, the Perl will once again come here and it will proceed to run. In that case, now we can do one thing, that is, after the subroutine completes, actually this subroutine passes some value to the place where you are invoking. Okay, so right now if you see, it still returns some value default, but we don't know what is that value that it is returning. But if this subroutine is returning a value, then you need to store it somewhere, right? That means when you execute this, the subroutine will get executed and then some value will get returned and that will be stored here. Okay, so now in order to store that return value, say for example, I call it like this. I'll say return equal to dollar. Okay, and if you try to see that value, return value is dollar ret. Okay, and I can do the same thing here, dollar return to. So what am I doing? I'm not doing anything. I just created one variable and I'm assigning this subroutine. That means I'm calling this subroutine on the right hand side. So now this way the subroutine will get called. But as I said, every subroutine will return a value. So whatever value that is returning, it will get stored here. That means now if you give like this here, on the right hand side, whatever you have will get evaluated. So if it's getting evaluated, now it is a subroutine. So it will go to this place, it will execute from here to here, and then while completing, the subroutine will return some value and that value will get stored here. And that is what you are trying to store it into a array, sorry, into a scalar variable. And the same thing happens here. So now see, by default, what is the value that an subroutine returns? So what is the value it is returning? By default, a subroutine returns a value of 1. That means if it is completing successfully, it returns a value of 1. So how did you get the value? That is because $ret contains 1. That is because this subroutine, after completing here, it is returning 1. That is the value 1 here, and that is what is getting stored here. Now, sometimes if you don't want to have that particular value, but you want to return some other value that you have worked here. For example, in this scenario, I don't want this average to be printed here itself, but I want to be printing it outside. Okay, so in that case, what we can do is I can return that value itself, whatever that you want. Now, how will you return that value? So if you want to return any value from subroutine to outside the main program, then you have to use a function called return. Now what is return going to do? Return will send the value whatever you are giving here back to the place where it got invoked. Okay, so now if you see, if you are invoking this, it will not return 1, but it will return the value whatever that this subroutine is passing. Okay, so that is what the function called return does. So see what happens here. So what happened? The same thing, instead of passing this 1, it is passing the value whatever that we have generated for the average. So this way you can specifically get back a value to the subroutine and you can do something else. Because many times what will happen is you do some value, you get that value, and further you want to do something only for that specific values, right? So in that case, if you see, you can return back and capture the value into a variable and you can reuse it. So this way, return helps us to send a value back to the main program from the subroutine. But remember one thing, return should always be at the last line, because what do you mean by return? Return means go back to the place where you started, right? So if you give return somewhere else in the beginning, while it is running, it will directly go to this place where it called. For example, okay, so here, now see the difference. Now when you call the average subroutine here, it will come and it will execute line by line. So in that case, first it should print the average and then return a value and then print this, right? But see what happens. So if you see, it is printing average of whatever is the value here. This line it is printing. After that, if you see, it is directly printing return value is 15. That means it is coming here and printing. Where is it printing this value? It is not printing this line. It is because whenever you say return, it means go back to the place from where you called. That means it will stop executing at this point and it will return to the main program. Okay, that is why it is not executing this. So whenever you give return, make sure you give return at the last line so that you complete all the execution and then return the value. If you give it anywhere between, so it will return here itself. That means it will print or it will execute the line before return and it will return the value, but it will not proceed because return means you're not just sending the value. How can you send a value? You can send a value only when you are coming back to this place, right? So it will come back to the execution. So if you come back to the execution, that means it has completed the task. So make sure you give the return at the end. Okay, so now see the difference. You see, it gets printed and then returns the value. After returning the value, it will go back to the main program and here you are printing the value. So after returning, then it comes here and prints it. Getting it? What's the difference between returning a value and how to return a value?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So by default, it will return 1, but if you want, we can return any other value for that specific program. But remember, return should always be the last line in your subroutine so that you will be going through all the lines that you have given or the statements in the subroutine, and at the end you will return. And the same value has to be captured by the main program into some variable. So based on the need, as I said, you will be changing it. Okay. So make sure now everything going forward, any practice that you do will always be on the subroutine, because subroutine helps us to simplify the code and completely reuse it. So you should always think, even it could be a simple one line or two line. I mean, for practice it's fine, but initially, if you get into any place into the production script, everyone will be using subroutines completely. Okay. Okay. Now
Yeah. Okay.
that was more from subroutine. Now, Perl, if you see until now, whatever that we have used is completely into the fundamentals on how to use variable, how to use, different kind of variable to store different types of data. And then we saw how to use condition, how to do arithmetic, how to make looping, subroutine. Now, going forward, you have to use all these things together to apply some kind of specific functionality. Now, one of the use case why Perl will be using is working on large files. Now, there will be many scenarios wherein you have to work on some kind of files. When I say file, you might have to read some content in the file and do something, or you might have to create a new file, put the data into it, like you want to write some log files, put all the information wherein you want to create a new file or read a file. So in that case, Perl supports the file input and output. That means you can read content from a file, at the same time you can write content into the file. So this is done using a library function called open. Just like how we saw, you know, chomp, print, all those things, there is one more library function called open. Now again, there are many functions that are available in the Perl. So now based on our need, we need to again explore what is that we have to do, because we don't have to write everything. For example, how do you open a file? To open a file, I have to say vi in a Unix. Now, instead of doing it, I'm going to use this open function, which Perl gives me, through which quickly I can do many other things. So like that, there are lots and lots of functions that are available by default. And again, now if you go back and think, all this whatever that you're seeing are not just commands. These are again functions. Functions are subroutines. Now, these are the subroutines or functions which has been given by the Perl by default. And all the subroutines that we are writing is specifically our user defined. So here, if you see, this is a subroutine that we wrote. In the same way, print is a subroutine which system understands. Okay, so that is how there are lots and lots of built-in functions that we have. So one among them is open, and the necessity for this is we have to use open to read or write a file using in your program. Now, how do you exactly use this open? So when you are using open, there are three values that you have to give for the open or the open function. Now, what are the three values? So the first value is called as file handler. Okay. And second thing is the mode of what or how you want to open the file. And then the third one is the file name. So what exactly is a file handler? Now, if you know, you might be having huge number of lines in a file, right? So how exactly Perl is going to read it? So Perl is going to read the content line by line. So now when it is reading line by line, how do you know exactly at which line of the file that you're currently working? So that is why it will be like a pointer wherein it will be going through line by line. So at any point of time, this file handler will be referring to the exact line where you are currently pointing to. Now, where file handler is nothing but a special variable, okay, which is going to contain the data, or it is going to contain the data from a particular file. Okay, so file handler is the actual variable, or you can call it as a special variable, using which we will be able to read the content of the file one by one. And that is how the Perl will also recognize which line that you are currently pointing to. So without file handler, you cannot get a value from a file, and Perl uses this file handler through which it is, as I said, it's a special variable which exactly points and stores a value. So right now, say if you're, this is a file, if you're going through line by line, suddenly, how do you know at which line that you're working? So this is the line where if Perl is working, then the file handler will be representing this particular line. So using this file handler, it can parse the value. So if you're going through files line by line or going through the file, then we call it as parsing the file. Okay, in terms of scripting, we call it as parsing the file. Now, once you know the file handler, the second thing is mode. So mode means what is that you want to do with that file. So there are basically three modes, that is read, write, and append. Wherein read means you are just opening the file just for reading, you're not manipulating anything. And if you say write, that means you are going to put some content into it. Okay, but append means even that is going to put some content, but the difference between write and append is whenever you use the write, it will always overwrite the existing data and it will try to put the value. But if you want to write on top of the existing value, then you use append. That is the difference. So if you want to overwrite the existing value, then you use write. If you just say append, then it will add to the existing value and it will proceed further. And finally, file name is nothing but the name of the file which you are trying to handle. Now, by default, if you give a file name, it will always be considered in the current directory from where you are running the Perl. So if the file is some other location, you have to specify the complete path of the file. Okay, so before that, let me show you the difference between write and append. Now here, so now I'm creating a dummy file, okay, called test. So if you see the content, there is nothing in the file, right? So quickly, let me put some line into it. So if I say echo line 1, okay, and to put the value, you will use greater than, wherein greater than represents the writing mode. So you are writing some content into the file called test. Okay, so I have written one line, you have. Now look carefully what happens if I write another line and use the same write mode. Okay, what happened? It is overwriting the existing value, right? The same thing now, if you want to do it in append mode, then you have to use a double arrow. So now if you say double greater than, whatever value that you're giving, it will write, but it will append with the existing one. It will not overwrite on whatever you have. So you see, that's the difference between write mode and append mode. And in fact, this is the same thing what we are going to use in the mode. How do you specify? Okay, so write mode means Suppose if you are opening a file in write, so at that script, how many ever times you are writing, right? It will take only that and it will store. So whatever you had the content before the file was opened will not be there. Whereas if you say append, whatever was existing along with it, it will try to add the new ones that you have. Okay. So how do you open the file? So like I said, you have to give the open function, the file handler, the mode, and the file name. Wherein file handler, as I said, it's a special variable where now you can give any string to it to identify. So it doesn't mean that this is the string that you have to give, but here the major difference is unlike other variables. So if you see, if it's an array, it starts with at the rate. If it's an what? A scalar variable, it will be dollar. But in this case, when you are working on a file handler, you don't have to use any specific dollar or at the rate because it is mainly for working on files. So simply you can give any string in the capitals so that it will be easy for us and the script to understand. So if you have the function opened, okay, so now the first one what you have to give is file handler. So all you have to do is you have to give a string in the capital. It's just a naming convention, and then followed by a comma, and then you have to specify the mode and the file name. So the mode is, as I said, it has to be open for reading, writing, or appending. So by default, if you don't give any mode and if you just say the file, so in our case, you give some file name here. So by default, it is understood that you are opening the file by read mode, or read mode is also represented by lesser than symbol. It's one and the same. So either you can say this way, or if you don't say any mode, by default, it understands that you are opening the file for reading. Now, if you want the file to open for write mode, then you have to simply say what? Greater than. And if you are opening the file in an append mode, then you have to say double greater than. Okay, this is how you will be working. And this is fine. Now, one thing what you need to know here is you are opening the file called file name and with the file handler. Now, all the content of the file will come to this file handler. But how is that you are going to use the content that is available in this file handler? Because I need to parse the file line by line, right? So now, in order to get the values line by line, the next thing what we need to do is we need to go through a loop, because here we know that this contains all the values of a file. So we need to parse it line by line. So once again, we have to go through what? Some looping mechanism through which we will be able to go through the content line by line. So that way, now here, one of the common way of using is a while function or while loop. So now how does while work? For while, we know that there is a condition that I have to give, right? So until the condition is true, it will be working. So since the file handler is a special variable, now what we can do is the special way of representing it is like this. So now when you say angular bracket, the file handler, this will take each line that is available in the file line by line. So right now what will happen is if you give it like this, all the content of the file will come here line by line. So this is like the condition will be true until you have a line in it. Suppose in the file, if you have 4 lines, that means the condition is true until 4 lines. Suppose when you don't have any line, then there will be no value here. That means if there is no value to a condition, it's obviously a wrong condition or a false condition, so that will not go. But until you have a single line of value from the file through this file handler, the file loop will be working because the condition is true. Here, condition means you are specifying the availability of a value, not a specific comparison of anything, but specifically if there is any value then it is considered as true. Okay, because in Perl we have two conventions wherein 0 and 1. So 0 is considered as what? False, and 1 is considered as true. Or in that fact, any value is considered as true, because 0 means there is null, there is no value. But if you have any value that is greater than 0, then it is called as true. In the same way, if you put some value, that means it is not a null, you have some value. So while will consider it as true and it will proceed. Okay, so this is how you will be proceeding. But now, yeah, this loop will go through all the contents line by line. But now we need the actual content from the file, right? So that is when there is one more variable called dollar underscore. So dollar underscore again is a special variable which is going to store the value that each line in the file handler is giving to the loop. Okay, so remember, dollar underscore is a special array which is used for parsing a file whenever you have a file handler. So now if you say dollar underscore here within a while loop, for every line that this file handler gives here, that line will be stored inside this dollar underscore. So now using this dollar underscore, you can do whatever you want for that line, because here now you are getting the specific content from the file, right? So you can use it. So remember these two things, that is, you need to use a file handler to parse, and then within a loop you have to use the dollar underscore that will give you the special value that has been passed by the file handler. Okay, so let us try to write a program and see exactly how it is going to work. Okay, now okay, so now we have a file called test, right? So I'm creating a function for opening. So here I will say RD. RD is nothing but I'm just saying it for reading the content. And for reading, I'm opening a file and it is test. Okay, that's what I'm doing. Now, when I say test, from where I'm creating the file, I'm creating the file 7.pl in the same directory. Okay, that is why. Suppose if the 7.pl is somewhere else or the test file is somewhere else, then I have to give the complete path of the file over here. Okay, and now I have not given any mode. That means I am using the function open for reading the file. Okay, so once this is done, now all the values of this file test will be present here. So in order to use it, what I have to do is I have to use this while, and here I'll say rd, and I'll open the bracket and I'll close it. Okay, and now here, see, if I simply say print dollar underscore, what will happen is for each line that is available in the test, this file handler will be passing the value to this dollar underscore, and the dollar underscore will be consuming the value, and it will be keep on printing, and how many ever lines you have, it will print as many. So first let's check for the syntax. Okay, you see it is printing. Okay, you see you have two lines, so it is printing two lines. But if you notice something, there is a line break here, right? Because what I was expecting the output is dash dash line 2 dash dash, same thing, dash dash line 1 dash dash, but it is giving a line break. That is because if you are reading the content from the file. In fact, this is not one line. This is two separate lines. That is because inside the file, you will be having a /n, which is a line separator, right? That is why it is coming up to a new line. So that is the very same reason when the file descriptor or the file handler is reading, it is also giving the same /n so that whatever that you are working should come in the new line. So that is why here it is also putting that. So in fact, it is not just line 2, you have line 2 /n, that is the new line character. So that is why this dash dash is also coming up to the end. So in order to remove that, what is that we have to do? We can do one thing, we can use the chomp, right? We can say chomp of that and you can get it. So instead of doing a chomp on the special variable itself, first thing what we can do is I can create a new scalar variable and I can try to store this value here, and then we can chomp that value. The reason is we can directly chomp this $_, but since it is a special value, it is always better not to handle or mess the values in the special variable of any Perl. Okay, I mean, any special variable of the Perl, you should not be messing it. So it's better you store it into a value. Now, this variable is a variable that we are creating, so I can manipulate it any point of time and it will not be a problem. Okay, so now you see, it gives you, sorry, it gives you the exact value. Okay, so like this, you can read the content of a file. Now, with just little difference, if I want the same thing, but I want to write something. So now the difference here is I am reading the content of the file, correct? But what if you want to write the content? Now, for writing the content, you don't have to read the file. You have to just directly write some content into the file. Now, in order to write the content, the only thing what you need to do is here. Now, whenever you are opening the file, you need to give the specification whether you want to write or append. Now, how do you do that? Now, before doing it, whenever you are opening a file handler, it's always a best practice to use a function called close and close this file descriptor. Okay, this way, it means now you are opening the file handler and the file handler has been closed. So beyond this line anywhere in the Perl will doesn't use or Perl will not use this file descriptor or file handler anymore. That is what it means. Okay. So now let us open the file handler once again, a new one, and say I'm trying to add the content. Okay. So I will say add, and here, since it is adding, I have to use one greater than symbol. Okay. So now I've opened. Now you have opened the file for adding or write mode, but you don't have to go through loop. So you are just saying that I have a file called test and I'm interested to write some content, and that will happen through this file descriptor called add. Okay. Now the question here is, how is that you're going to write some content? Now, to write a content, the only thing that we know is generally we use print. So what is the purpose of print? Print is for printing on the screen. So we can use the same print to print the output to a file also. So to do that, simply if you say print, okay, now after the print, you have to specify the file handler name and then the content, whatever you want to give. So if I say line 3, I'll say line 4. Okay, so now see this, what it is going to do. So I'm opening up a file handler called add for write mode for the file called test. And then here I am putting some two lines into the file using this file handler called add. So instead of just using the print line, if you say print the file handler and the content whatever you want, rather than printing this on the screen like what used to do here, it will take this value and print inside this file, and you will not be seeing anything on the output. So okay, so now if you see, it has end of the script, right? So let's see the content of the file called test. You see what happened. So we had this line 2 and line 1 first, but since you are putting it in a write mode, it is overwriting the existing content. So the line 1, line 2 is gone. So whenever you use write mode, it will overwrite it. Now the same thing, if you want to append, then all you have to do is use it in a append mode. So if you say double greater than, it is going to add, right? So now if I run the same thing, whatever the value you have, on the same value it is going to add another two values. So that means now I already have a content called line 3 and line 4. So once again, if I run on existing value, it is going to create once more line 3 and line 4. That means you will be having two times line 3 and line 4. See, getting the difference between the append mode and the read mode, sorry, append mode and the write mode. So generally, if you say write with just one greater than, it is going to be just overwriting the existing content. The same thing, if you want to add to the existing one, then you have to use two greater thans. Getting the difference?
Yeah.
Yeah.